The night Tehran went quiet wasn't the night bombs fell or crowds flooded the streets. It was quieter than that. Too quiet. Phones stopped updating. Senior officials vanished from public view. State television repeated old footage. And behind the scenes, the question everyone inside Iran's power structure was afraid to ask out loud suddenly became unavoidable. What happens if the supreme leader is no longer in control, or no longer alive, and who takes over next? For decades, the Islamic Republic has been built around the image of permanence. The system was designed to look immovable, unshakable, eternal. But history has a habit of collapsing the strongest-looking regimes in moments that don't look dramatic at first. Often, it begins with uncertainty at the very top. In Iran's case, that uncertainty centers on one man, Ali Khamenei, and an increasingly visible reality. Power in Iran may already be slipping out of clerical hands and into the grip of the Revolutionary Guards. To understand why rumors of collapse feel more real now than at any time in recent memory, you have to understand how Iran's system actually works, beyond slogans and ceremonies. Iran is not just a religious state. It is a hybrid of clerical authority, military power, and economic control, constantly balanced to prevent any one faction from completely dominating the others. For years, the supreme leader sat above them all, acting as the final referee. But referees only matter when players accept the rules. And today, many inside Iran no longer do. Ali Khamenei is in his mid-80s, and while Iranian state media insists he is strong and healthy, reality tells a different story. He has disappeared from public view for extended periods before. His speeches are increasingly pre-recorded. His movements are tightly controlled. And perhaps most telling of all, succession planning has quietly accelerated. In authoritarian systems, succession is the most dangerous moment. It is when loyalty fractures, ambition surface, and hidden power networks move into the open. Here is an important fact many people outside Iran don't realize. The supreme leader does not command power alone. His authority only exists as long as the institutions beneath him enforce it. And the single most powerful institution in Iran today is not the clergy. It is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. The IRGC began as a revolutionary militia in 1979, meant to protect the Islamic Revolution from internal and external enemies. Over time, it evolved into something far more powerful. Today, it controls significant portions of Iran's economy, from construction and energy to telecommunications and smuggling networks. It commands its own military branches, intelligence units, cyber forces, and foreign proxy networks. In many ways, it functions like a state within a state. Another key insight. While Iran has a regular army, the Artesh, it is the IRGC that receives preferential funding, advanced weapons, and political influence. This was not accidental. The supreme leader relied on the IRGC as a counterbalance to civilian politicians and even to other clerics. But reliance creates dependency, and dependency shifts power. As public unrest has grown across Iran, the regime's survival has increasingly depended on force rather than legitimacy. Protests over economic collapse, corruption, and political repression have erupted again and again. Each time, it is not clerics who restore order. It is the IRGC and its affiliated security forces. When bullets become the language of governance, the people holding the guns eventually realize their leverage. This is where the idea of collapse becomes more complex than images of tanks rolling through Tehran. Collapse doesn't always mean instant chaos. Sometimes it means the slow hollowing out of authority until the center can no longer hold. In Iran, clerical legitimacy has been eroding for years. Fewer young Iranians believe in the religious foundations of the state. Turnout in elections has dropped sharply. Even conservative families quietly express disillusionment. Meanwhile, the IRGC has positioned itself not just as an enforcer, but as a savior of the nation. Its propaganda emphasizes security, nationalism, resistance to foreign pressure, and economic resilience. Notice something important here. The messaging is increasingly nationalistic, not religious. That shift matters. It suggests a future Iran led less by clerics in turbans and more by generals in uniform. Another critical insight often missed is that the IRGC already runs Iran's regional strategy. Groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq, and forces in Syria and Yemen do not answer to Iran's president or parliament. They answer to IRGC commanders. Foreign policy, warfare, and strategic deterrence are already militarized. Domestic control may simply be the next step. Now imagine a scenario where the supreme leader suddenly becomes incapacitated or dies. Officially, the Assembly of Experts is supposed to choose a successor. But in practice, no successor can rule without the IRGC's blessing. The question isn't who replaces Khamenei. The real question is who controls the guns, the money, and the streets during the transition. History offers chilling parallels. In many regimes, from late Soviet Russia to modern military states, moments of leadership vacuum are when power quietly transfers to security institutions. They present themselves as stabilizers, protectors, temporary guardians, and then they never leave. Inside Iran, signs of this possibility are already visible. Senior IRGC figures increasingly speak on political issues. Former commanders occupy key government positions. Economic monopolies tied to the guards expand while civilian sectors shrink. This isn't preparation for chaos, it's preparation for control. At the same time, external pressure is squeezing Iran hard. Sanctions have crippled the economy. Inflation has destroyed purchasing power. Oil revenues fluctuate. Isolation grows. In such environments, regimes often militarize further, not less. The IRGC thrives in crisis. Smuggling networks expand. Black market economies grow. Sanctions become a profit opportunity rather than a weakness. Here is another uncomfortable truth. Many elites inside Iran may actually prefer IRGC control to clerical uncertainty. Military rule promises order, predictability, protection of assets. Clerical rule promises ideology, which is harder to manage when people are hungry and angry. But what would an IRGC-led Iran actually look like? It would likely be more openly authoritarian, less concerned with religious justification, and more aggressive in projecting power abroad while tightening control at home. It could resemble a national security state rather than a theocracy. For ordinary Iranians, this may not feel like collapse at all. It may feel like continuity under a new face. And yet, this transition carries enormous risks. Power struggles within the IRGC itself, resistance from clerical factions unwilling to surrender influence, public backlash if repression intensifies, and the ever-present danger of miscalculation with foreign adversaries watching closely. This is why whispers about the supreme leader not seeing tomorrow are less about literal timelines and more about symbolic reality. The system he represents is aging, stressed, and increasingly dependent on force. Whether change comes suddenly or gradually, the center of gravity in Iran is shifting. As Tehran waits, watches, and whispers, one thing is clear. The question is no longer whether Iran will change, but who will be holding the keys when it does. And in the shadows of power, the IRGC appears more ready than ever. What makes this moment even more dangerous is that the struggle unfolding inside Iran is not happening in isolation. It is happening while the country is under immense external pressure, while its population is younger, more connected, and more disillusioned than ever, and while the institutions meant to manage succession look increasingly ceremonial rather than decisive. When all of these forces collide, systems don't simply bend, they fracture. One of the least understood dynamics in Iran is the quiet rivalry between the clerical establishment and the Revolutionary Guards. Publicly, they present a united front. Privately, they compete for influence, resources, and survival. Clerics derive legitimacy from religious authority and revolutionary ideology. The IRGC derives legitimacy from force, security, and control. In the early years of the Islamic Republic, these two sources of power reinforced each other. Today, they are drifting apart. A revealing insight is how Iran's economy has changed. Large portions of infrastructure projects, ports, oil logistics, and even consumer markets are tied directly or indirectly to IRGC-linked companies. This didn't happen overnight. It accelerated as sanctions squeezed out foreign firms and weakened private businesses. The guards stepped in as problem solvers. Roads still needed building. Oil still needed exporting. Goods still needed moving. Over time, economic survival became militarized. For ordinary Iranians, this meant fewer opportunities outside state-linked networks. For the IRGC, it meant leverage. Money buys loyalty. It also buys silence. When a military organization controls both security and livelihoods, it no longer needs ideology to enforce obedience. Stability becomes transactional. Meanwhile, the clerical system has struggled to adapt. Religious messaging that once mobilized millions now resonates far less with a generation raised on the internet, global culture, and economic hardship. Surveys and anecdotal evidence suggest a growing number of young Iranians see religion as a personal matter, not a political mandate. That erosion of belief strikes at the heart of the clerical state. Another critical factor is fear within the elite itself. Succession doesn't just worry citizens, it terrifies insiders. Ministers, judges, businessmen, and mid-level commanders all know that transitions are when scores are settled. Allegiances shift fast. Old protection disappears. In such moments, people align with whoever can guarantee survival. Increasingly, that guarantor is not a cleric, it is the IRGC. This is why even rumors about the supreme leader's health carry such explosive weight. In Iran, rumors are signals. They trigger quiet repositioning. Meetings behind closed doors, phone calls that don't get logged, decisions that don't get announced. By the time the public sees change, it has often already happened. The IRGC understands this better than anyone. It has spent years building redundancy, multiple command layers, decentralized units, loyal intelligence networks. If chaos erupts, it doesn't need instructions. It already knows how to move. That preparedness alone makes it the default power broker in any crisis. There's also an international dimension that cannot be ignored. Foreign governments, particularly in the region, already treat the IRGC as the real decision maker. When tensions flare, it is IRGC commanders who issue threats. When negotiations stall, it is IRGC-linked actions that escalate. The world has learned quietly who really holds Iran's hard power. Another lesser-known fact is that many sanctions target IRGC entities directly. This has had a paradoxical effect. Instead of weakening the guards, sanctions have often strengthened their monopoly. As legal trade shrinks, gray markets expand. Smuggling becomes strategic. Control over illicit routes becomes power. The IRGC thrives in environments where rules break down. Inside Iran, this has blurred the line between legality and survival. Citizens rely on informal economies. Officials turn a blind eye. Enforcement becomes selective. In such systems, armed institutions always gain the upper hand. They decide what is tolerated and what is punished. At the same time, public trust continues to erode. Even when protests are crushed, resentment does not disappear. It sinks. It waits. People stop believing official narratives. They stop expecting reform. They stop caring about appearances. This is a dangerous stage for any regime because fear can suppress action, but it cannot restore legitimacy. Here's a sobering insight from history. Regimes rarely fall when opposition is loud. They fall when opposition becomes silent and the elite begins to fracture. Iran shows signs of both. Streets quiet after crackdowns, but conversations grow darker. Loyalty becomes conditional. Everyone watches everyone else. In this environment, the idea of an IRGC takeover may not look like a coup. There may be no announcement, no tanks at parliament. Instead, it could look like continuity. The supreme leader passes. A successor is named. Institutions remain. But behind the curtain, decision-making shifts decisively to military hands. This kind of transition is difficult to reverse. Once power is militarized, it rarely returns to civilian or clerical control willingly. Security logic replaces ideological debate. Dissent becomes a threat, not a disagreement. And reform becomes synonymous with weakness. Yet this path is not guaranteed. There are risks for the IRGC as well. Absolute power creates absolute responsibility. If economic conditions worsen further, if public anger explodes beyond control, the guards may find themselves blamed not just as enforcers, but as rulers. And ruling is harder than suppressing. There's also the possibility of internal fractures. The IRGC is not monolithic. It contains factions with different interests, loyalties, and visions for Iran's future. Some prioritize regional expansion, others focus on domestic stability. Power struggles within such an organization can be just as destabilizing as external threats. Still, from the outside looking in, the trajectory appears clear. Clerical authority is fading, military influence is rising. The balance that defined the Islamic Republic for decades is shifting. Whether this ends in collapse, transformation, or prolonged repression remains uncertain. What is certain is that Iran is approaching a defining moment. Not a single day, not a single announcement, but a period where old rules no longer apply and new ones are being written in real time. And as this slow-motion power transfer continues, the rest of the world is watching closely, because what happens next inside Iran will not stay inside Iran for long. As this defining moment approaches its peak, one question hangs over everything: what happens the day after? Not the day the announcement is made, not the moment headlines break, but the quiet morning when millions of Iranians wake up and realize something fundamental has changed. History shows that the most dangerous phase of any political transition is not the fall itself, but the vacuum that follows. In Iran's case, that vacuum may be filled faster than many expect, but the cost of that speed could reshape the country for decades. If clerical authority weakens beyond repair, the state will still need a spine. Electricity must flow, borders must be guarded, protests must be controlled. In moments like these, ideology becomes secondary to logistics, and logistics, by their very nature, favor those who already command weapons, intelligence, and manpower. This is where the IRGC's long preparation becomes decisive. They don't need to convince the population they are legitimate. They only need to be indispensable. Yet indispensability carries a price. Once the guards move from enforcers to rulers, every failure becomes theirs. Inflation is no longer the fault of faceless clerics. Power outages are no longer blamed on abstract sanctions. Public anger gains a clear target. This is the paradox of power. The more control you have, the fewer excuses remain. There's also the psychological dimension to consider. For decades, the Islamic Republic framed itself as a divine system guided by religious authority. A militarized state cannot rely on that narrative. It must justify itself through strength, security, and nationalism. That shift may resonate with some segments of society, especially those exhausted by chaos and instability. But it alienates others, particularly younger generations, who already feel disconnected from both religious and military rule. One striking fact is that more than half of Iran OS population was born after the Iran-Iraq War. They did not experience the trauma that shaped the revolutionary generation. For them, sacrifice is not a sacred memory, it is an economic burden. They measured legitimacy not by slogans, but by opportunity. Any system that cannot deliver jobs, dignity, and a future will face quiet resistance, even if open protest is suppressed. Another often overlooked reality is how interconnected Iran has become despite isolation. Millions of Iranians use VPNs daily. They follow global trends, watch foreign media, and compare their lives to those elsewhere. This constant comparison fuels frustration. It also makes information control harder than ever. Even the most disciplined security apparatus cannot fully seal a modern society. Externally, a shift toward overt military dominance would send shockwaves across the region. Neighbors would recalibrate. Allies would grow cautious. Rivals would test boundaries. The IRGC's regional strategy, built on proxies and deniability, might need to evolve if it becomes the face of the state rather than its shadow. That evolution carries risks of miscalculation, especially when deterrence replaces diplomacy. At the same time, foreign pressure could intensify. A militarized Iran may face harsher sanctions, deeper isolation, and fewer diplomatic off-ramps. This could trap the country in a cycle where economic pain justifies repression, and repression invites more pressure. Breaking that cycle would require strategic restraint, something not easily practiced in moments of consolidation. Still, history rarely moves in straight lines. There is room for unexpected outcomes, internal negotiations, temporary power sharing, even a slow rebranding rather than an outright takeover. Iranian politics has always been more fluid behind closed doors than it appears on the surface. What looks like collapse from the outside may feel like controlled adaptation from the inside. But adaptation has limits. Systems built on fear can endure, but they cannot inspire. They can enforce order, but they struggle to generate loyalty. Over time, that gap widens, and when loyalty erodes completely, even the strongest institutions begin to crack. The coming years will test whether Iran's power structure can evolve without breaking, or whether it will double down on control at the expense of connection with its people. The answer will not be decided by one man's health alone, but by how institutions respond when the illusion of permanence disappears. What we are witnessing is not just a political shift. It is a generational reckoning. A moment when the myths of the past collide with the realities of the present. And in that collision, something new will emerge, whether carefully designed or chaotically imposed. For the world, understanding this moment matters. Not because Iran is collapsing tomorrow, but because the choices made now will shape regional stability, global security, and the lives of millions for years to come. This is not a story of sudden endings. It is a story of slow, irreversible change. And as the shadows lengthen over Tehran's corridors of power, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. When a system prepares more for control than consent, it reveals its deepest fear, not of enemies abroad, but of its own future. If you found this breakdown insightful, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more deep dive analysis, and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Iran is heading toward transformation or toward tighter control? Your perspective matters. The conversation is just beginning.